Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Oraculos HORARY Astrology Hotline. I'm your host, Mychal Bryan, and joining me today are my dear friends and colleagues and fellow astrologers who I'm going to introduce in just a bit. But hey there, everyone. Now, today, here with me are Ms. TRACEY PACELLI, all the way in Florida. Well, you're not all the way in Florida. Florida is like right there, but TRACEY PACELLI over there in Florida. Hey there, TRACEY. How are you?
Hey there, Mychal. I'm doing good. Giants are in first place, and it's 82 today, so I'm happy after a cold snap.
Good stuff, TRACEY. And to my right is Miss RASHA HASAN. RASHA, how are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm excited to be here. Down below is Ms. JANAY Anthony. JANAY, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Awesome sauce. I'm doing pretty great, JANAY. And last but definitely not least is Mr. Cameron Allen over in Memphis, Tennessee. The last time I checked, you were in Memphis. Are you still in Memphis, Cameron?
Yeah, I'm still in Memphis. It's been actually really nice to be back around community. So yeah, it's good.
Awesome. Well, I'm really happy to have all of you here today, and we've really had quite an adventure these past few weeks with this HORARY Astrology Hotline. And for those of you who this is your first time joining us here on the HORARY Astrology Hotline, this is a show where we take a look at horary questions and questions that people bring to the astrological consultative space. And sometimes they're horary questions, sometimes they're natal questions that are answered in horary ways. But all the same, this is a show where we answer people's questions that they bring to astrology. So if you're excited about being a part of that magic and momentum that we're building over here on the Oraculos podcast, please do make sure that you go down below and hit the subscribe button as well as the notification bell. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, anywhere across the internet, please do make sure that you share this podcast with your other astrologically and magically minded friends. Now, today we're going to be going into our last horary for the year, and I'm amazed at how quickly this went. I'm amazed that the year has gone by so fast. It's truly been quite the year, but I'm also amazed that we have really been putting out the work in terms of the podcast for the last few weeks. So I just want to put it out there for you all to say, how has this experience diving back into this horary space been for you? Because I know that when we met earlier in the year, we were all at a different sort of space in terms of our own practice and our understanding of horary. But now I think we've come to more of a streamlined sort of situation. So how has this experience of being here on the show aided you within your own astrological life, not just the horary part, but your astrological life in general?
I think what I really love best about it is not only, of course, learning the technique and sharpening the tools and practicing, but it's the weekly get-togethers that I have with our cohorts. And we all do also blend in our own personal styles. And we've been learning from each other, which has just been such an awesome thing. Everybody has their own different perspectives that they add and bring to the table. And it's been really eye-opening, awakening, fun, because these are really fun personalities. And it's just, again, sharpened our tools.
Good stuff, TRACEY. And awesome sauce, TRACEY and RASHA, for getting together initially and putting together that weekly meeting, because I think it's really special when people who have studied together don't just have that studying space as an isolated moment in time, but that you can continue to grow with each other, help each other, and like you said, learn from each other. So good stuff.
Really, the highlight for me for this year astrologically is learning the horary astrology. It's a wonderful door open, I feel, for me, and I know this is gonna bring other avenues for like traditional astrology and it's just really been wonderful. I'm so glad we started immediately. You know, the course was in August, August, and TRACEY and I, we started immediately after the program finished with you. And then, Janay and Cameron also will join us. And it's just been really fun to look at the chart in a different way. And then we put our knowledge as well here and there. It's been really wonderful. I'm loving it. So thank you, Mychal, for that, really. And thank you for putting us all together in this podcast. I mean, such an amazing teacher. Yeah, you're putting your time and effort into your students. So I very much appreciate it.
You're very, very welcome, RASHA. Thank you so much. Janay?
Yeah, I agree with everything that RASHA and TRACEY just said. Before taking the class back in August, I literally knew nothing about horary astrology. And so coming from a place of knowing very little about a subject to then being, fluent in the language, more or less, is like, it's an incredible experience. And also the fact that it happened only over a couple months. So if anyone is thinking about learning horary, I definitely recommend taking the course because you can learn it. I learned it, you can learn it too. But yeah, I just appreciate, kind of echoing what my friends just said, I appreciate everybody's different perspective because the learning didn't just end in that, that 10-day period of the horary intensive. We get together every week and, we just learn from each other. I'm constantly learning, and I have a 9th house Venus, a bunch of stuff in Gemini. I love to learn. And so it's just been an incredible experience.
Awesome sauce, Janay. Well, I'm really happy to have you here, and I'm also happy that you've had such a good experience. And yeah, also with the horary course, it was open to people who already had a basis in astrology. So if you're just starting out astrology, it probably isn't the first place where you want to learn from. But if you do feel as if you have the foundational astrological understandings underneath your feet and you've been working with astrology for a while and now you're ready to take your practice in another direction, I think that taking the horary intensive is a wonderful thing for everyone to do, just because it isn't about necessarily learning a new skill, but it's about learning how to see your astrology in a different way. So it's like probably putting on a new pair of glasses, if it could be compared to that, because it's still the same astrology, but it's applying those astrological concepts that you currently know in a way that brings a very specific sort of meaning, as well as very specific sorts of answers. So, Cameron?
Yeah, it's been great. Getting together every week with everybody has been amazing. And just everybody's reflection just always lands on me so profound. And I'm not the type of person often to listen to other people. I'm really not. I can admit that about myself. However, it's I have 3 other people that say things and it just lands so nicely. And it's just really nice for me. It's like a treat every week, to come together. And then just learning the class in general. I remember when I was taking the intensive, I would have to sleep so much more. And that gives me I'm actually learning really well. When I learn stuff a lot, I just get into this hibernation mode. So I just consume knowledge and just sleep. So it's been amazing. And I learned it really quickly too, as well. The way you teach just landed perfectly for me. And I knew it before I even came into the course. But yeah, it's been amazing. And also, when I first started astrology, it was from because I was working at a spiritual supply store. So it's it literally went from people always asking me about their karma and their soul to this very concrete thing, that we can answer a question that's just an external manifestation that's just solid. And, you always say something you can sink your teeth into. So it's for me to have that, now I don't feel, even though I don't feel I was polarized, but it just brings me even more harmony and fluidity within any type of astrological lens and perspective. So it's been beautiful in that way.
Awesome, Cameron, and awesome everyone for holding this space and keeping this space alive, because it was a very specific point of meeting that we all had. But the fact that we're all still here today, all still able to sit in this space, speaking a common tongue and sharing this common language of horary astrology, it allows our conversations with each other to be more profound and more clear, but it also allows the conclusions that we all come to be a lot more systematic, because now we're not just guessing or pulling anything out of our astrological toolkit, but we're actively applying a very specific set of skills, a very specific rubric that allows us to come to, hopefully, if we're all operating from the same knowledge bases, the same approximate answer. No matter which one of us is picking up these charts, we're all able to come to the same answer because we're operating from the same fundamental knowledge base. So I'm really excited to see how this connection grows as we move into the year 2021. But as we end 2020 with this show today, I just want to say thank you all for being in this space, and also thank you to our listeners for being here and following these charts with us and allowing themselves to go on this journey, because it's truly been an amazing experience. So thank you a million. Now, today we are moving on to a very specific sort of horary that kind of fills the role that a number of our other horaries have taken, insofar as it does include a relationship between two people. So as we go in, I'm going to let Tracy let us know what the question is that this querent came and wanted to find guidance on.
Okie doke. The question was, is now a good time to take legal action against my ex? And the question also involves custody, and that the ex wants full custody of their young daughter.
Yes. Definitely, Tracy. So Tracy, tell us how you approached it, or what were some of the things that came up for you as you thought about working out this chart?
I mean, definitely, as always, you know, starting with the basic rubric of horary, looking at the ascendant, even just seeing what modality that's in, and seeing where the querent's Lord One is located, and what kind of essential dignities and strengths that has, as well as the accidental dignities and strengths. And then we have to look at legal action itself. So you have to look at the 9th house, which is a house where the lawyer would sit. And then also the 2nd house, which would be also could be her lawyer, someone that stands in and represents the querent. And then you can also look at the 8th house, representing the ex's querent as well. And then the 10th house would be the judge. So you can look at all those basic components and just see how they fit together.
Good stuff. Now, something that we should know about these questions when there is someone wanting to take legal action against someone else is we're essentially looking at the 1st house and the 7th house. Just from the basis of your opponent in court being your quote unquote open enemy, we know in astrology we have this concept of the hidden enemy, which is the 12th house. But we also know that we have this concept of the open enemy. Now, the open enemy isn't necessarily someone who is shooting you with a gun. The open enemy is the person who you're running against, if we're talking about an election, or it's the person who you're actively fighting against or battling in court, if we're talking about that. Or if we're talking about chess, because the whole world is talking about chess right now, your open enemy is going to be the person who you're playing against, your opponent. So we're looking at the 1st house and the 7th house, because the 1st house is always going to be the querent, but the 7th house is going to be the quesited, the person who we're seeking to gain legal action against. And then, yes, as you rightfully said, Tracy, the other houses, the 9th house is representing a house of the lawyer, perhaps, or the 10th house is representing the house of the judge. And then there's this little known concept about the 2nd house, where the 2nd house is always your second person in battle. And I've sat with this for a long time because we don't really have a lot of literature around this. So this is something that I always try to look at when I'm looking at these sorts of legal questions as well. Who is this person's second? Who is this person's advisor? Who is this person's counselor? In the same way as the 10th house is representing the king, but the 11th house is representing the advisors to the king. It's a similar manner in which the first house is going to represent you, and then the second house is going to represent your advisors, the people who are your right-hand people. If you get your legs chopped off in battle, who's going to run with your sword and finish the fight for you? That's going to be the person who you find within the second house. And so since there hasn't been that much work on this, it's something that I always apply to see how far it can be taken. But I always still remember that the second house is still always going to have some association with the sort of financial support a person has in order to support themselves in whatever proceedings they find themselves in. So whether we view the second house as being your counselor, your advisor, or we view the second house as being the sort of real tangible support you have in terms of money to be in this sort of lawsuits to begin with, it's still showing how are you supported and what sort of tools or resources do you have to tap into in order to win the fight, essentially. So without further ado, here's our chart for the day. Do enjoy. So here's our chart in which the querent is asking whether or not now is an appropriate time to take legal action against X. And X is both to hide the other person's anonymity, but X is also her ex, who she's wanting to take legal action against. The chart details are: this chart was cast on the 22nd of November, 2020, which was a Sunday at 6:21:23 p.m. So that's 6:21 and 23 seconds p.m. in Nassau, Bahamas. And we are on Eastern Standard Time, geocentric, tropical, Regiomontanus, and we're using the true node. All right.
Yeah, the first house is ruled by, it's a Gemini, 17-degree Gemini, and it's ruled by Mercury, and Mercury is in Scorpio, so over 16-degree exactly. It's in Scorpio, so Mercury is in Scorpio is peregrine. So the querent who's asking this question is really reflecting that she's kind of in a bad environment. She doesn't have the support. She kind of lost. Peregrine, you told us to say it's like it's somebody who's in a foreigner in a foreign land. So she doesn't have the support. She's confused and in a weak position in a way, and has no essential because Mercury has no essential dignity there. So yeah, that's why. And because Mercury is the 6th house, so it has really 25-degree power in it. So she is, that's why I said she is kind of in a weak position.
Yeah, so along the lines of Mercury being in the 6th house, it's like the 6th house is a house where, you know, most planets don't enjoy being in the 6th house because it's a lot of work. It's very tiring, exhausting even. And so we have this Mercury that's uncomfortable to begin with because, you know, it's in Scorpio, a water sign, which means, you know, Mercury is in a mute sign. And on top of that, like being in a cadent house where it can't really perform in the way that would get a lot of results. I think the last thing I would add with this Mercury is that very close trine it's making with Neptune, and when Neptune is involved, things are unclear. There's not really a way to see a way out. So Mercury is feeling lost on a bunch of different levels.
Good stuff, Janae.
Okay, yeah, so the 7th house ruler is Jupiter, and Jupiter is in its fall, and it would be in the other's 2nd house. So they're not looking the greatest either there, honestly. Yeah, but then also, so Jupiter is that would be considered a succeedent house. So the other person would at least have like 50% strength to like fortify or to create something that they're trying to create. So that's a little better than the cadent However, it's still in fall there. So yeah, it's not too strong, but it, you know, in contrast, it's something to think about.
Good stuff. Now, Tracy, you take it away with any final wrapping ups that you would like to do, and then I will jump in the fray.
Okay. So also about Mercury is where it's located in that sixth house would be a house of hidden enemies. And I just find it like really interesting too in the sign of Scorpio that there seems to be some sort of anger piece that would be there as well. You know, being that Mars would be the ruler and Mars is making a quincunx to that Mercury, which is something interesting too. And also that it even forms a finger of God, like with the ascendant, making a quincunx. And so, I mean, there really seems to be like a piece where it's hard for the querent to see clearly because they might be coming through a lens of anger. And what they really need is maybe to make some sort of adjustment there. So I just really wanted to bring in that whole, you know, they definitely seem to have these motives of just, you know, being a hidden enemy, that the word enemy seems to be playing out kind of strong.
Great stuff, Tracy. Now, when I come here, I receive an education from you all as well, because when you said finger of God, I had to I had to stop for 2 seconds to think, oh, what, finger of God? And then I remembered the whole situation with Yods being called the finger of God. And so, yes, you are correct that a Yod is 2 quincunxes and a sextile. So we have the Mars having a sextile relationship to the ascendant. We have the Mercury ruling the ascendant in a quincunx relationship to the ascendant, as well as the Mercury, even though it's being disposed of by the Mars, is in a quincunx relationship to the Mars. Now, quincunxes are a very important aspect that people tend to sleep on in traditional astrology, and I'm not sure why that is. A quincunx is essentially an aspect of no relationship, and therefore it's called a non-aspect, because from the ascendant, or from 0 degrees of anything, basically, or 0 degrees on any circle, 150 degrees away from that point would be the quincunx. And so Aries, for example, if we were to start Aries as the first house, then Virgo, being 150 degrees away from Aries, would be the quincunx sign to Aries, as well as Scorpio, being 150 degrees away from Aries on the other side, would be the quincunx sign to the Aries. And of course, we're referring to 0 Aries to 0 Scorpio is 150, as well as 0 Aries to 0 Virgo is 150. So those are signs that are quincunx. And what that means is that they have no actual aspect relationship. The other term for this is aversion, that these signs are in aversion to each other because they can't see each other. So when we deal with something like a quincunx, and I'm very happy that you brought it up, Tracy, because I honestly, when I'm in the process of giving a reading, I tend to go for the jugular because I do horary on the spot. I don't write written reports and send to people. I do horary on the spot. And so there's benefits to that, but the drawback from that is that you don't always see all of the things that you would like to speak about. That point that you just made about this quincunx situation between the Mars and the Mercury and the ascendant is very important, because when a planet is in a quincunx relationship to the house that it rules, that can be one of the indications that that planet has no ability to deliver on the promise of the house that it rules. Now, this is a horary consideration, but this is also a natal astrology consideration as well. The ascendant, as we know in traditional astrology, is representing the body, the physical corporature of a person that they are incarnated into as they come into this world. So when the ruler of the ascendant is in a quincunx relationship to the ascendant, that means that the person who rules the ascendant and the ascendant itself are in aversion to each other. And what I found very often in natal astrology, and I'm not saying that this is invariable, and I'm not saying that this is going to be always the case, but what I found very often in natal astrology is that people who have their chart ruler, i.e. the ruler of the first house, in a quincunx relationship to the ascendant, are oftentimes people who feel a constant and a continuous discomfort in their bodies for whatever reason. And there are many reasons why a person would feel uncomfortable within their physical body. But when I've seen this natally and I've brought it up to people and I've said, hey, this is something that I've noticed, a lot of people really resonate with that there's always been a thing where they felt a fundamental seed of discomfort, whether or not they felt as if they were gendered incorrectly when they were born, or whether they felt as if they were unattractive their entire lives. It's this piece that has seemed to come up. And as all of these anecdotal things in astrology, more research needs to be done around it. But even beyond that, very specific example, this quincunx relationship of a planet to the house it rules is often an indication that that planet is not going to have the ability to deliver on the promise of that house. Because if you're in the quincunx to the house you rule, that means you're also in the quincunx to the sign that you rule, which means invariably you're going to be peregrine, as is the state of this Mercury here. So this person does feel as if she's in a space where she's peregrine within the world, because the Mercury at 16 degrees Scorpio is peregrine, but she's also feeling as if she's in the space of slavery, as if she's in a space where she's having to exert an inordinate amount of effort in order to hold on to any feeling of strength that she finds in the situation. And that's something that was true. Here she found herself thrown into this whole legal world and not feeling as if she knew anything about the legal system at all, and finding herself day after day deluged with this humongous amount of legal paperwork. Her entire home was covered in this legal paperwork that felt completely like a burden, a point of slavery, but also a very deep point of unrest and dis-ease within her life, insofar as it took her very far from her comfort zone of who she was comfortable being and how she was comfortable showing up in this situation. So that is a reason why we have the Mercury in the state that it's in the 6th house. And yes, as you pointed out as well, Tracy, it is the 12th house for the Quested, because if the 7th house is the Quesed's first house, then yes, this is his 12th house. And so she does seem as if she's a quote-unquote hidden enemy from his perspective. But from her perspective, she feels as if she's a servant, she's a slave, she's doing this work that comes with no graciousness, she's doing this work that comes with no feeling of pride within herself, because she's being dragged through the ground as she tries to figure out how to navigate this situation. And it is a position of weakness, truly. So, Tracy, we've spoken a lot about her being in the 6th house, but now talk to me a bit about him being in his own 2nd house, because Cameron did point this out earlier. Cameron said that he does seem to be stronger than her based on the house position, but what might it mean for him to be in his own 2nd house?
Well, number one, he would be very concerned about his money. And so I would say that's a great concern, especially, and you have Jupiter representing him and Jupiter being in its fall, which would be, falling from an extreme height, so to speak. And it looks like his money itself is not weak, because Saturn would rule that, and that is in Capricorn. But that he would have a great concern, that he would be losing a lot of his money. If this should go against him, or if some kind of long legal, bout should take place.
Definitely. Also significant about this Saturn is that this Jupiter is being received by this Saturn. So there is a reception going on here. And there's another term, which is pushing of nature. And when a planet pushes nature, that means that it's in one of the essential dignities of the planet that it's applying to. So here, Jupiter is pushing the nature of Saturn to Saturn because Jupiter is applying to Saturn from Capricorn, which is one of Saturn's two domiciles. So you're correct. His money does seem to be very strong in this situation. And another thing that I think is important about the second house for anyone that a lot of people don't realize is that the second house in some systems of medieval astrology has been considered to be a house of nutriment and food. Because if we consider the houses to be the different things that happen to a person after a person has been born, the very next thing that happens to a person after they come out of their mother's womb is that they receive nutriment, they receive food, they receive liquid resources, which is essentially money. You know, money is liquid resources, but your mother's breast milk is also liquid resources. So the second house being traditionally associated with food is saying that this is where you feel supported, this is where you feel held, this is where you find the resources that you need in order to move strongly within the world. So even though he himself, as Jupiter in Capricorn, isn't really in the best shape at all because of the lack of dignity that Jupiter has in Capricorn, the Jupiter is in Capricorn being received by its ruler, i.e. the Saturn, and the Saturn is in a wonderful state being in Capricorn, readily receiving that Jupiter and saying, you need money, you need financial support, you need your mother's breast milk, here it is in bountiful supply.
Okay, so the moon is in Pisces, has a little bit of a dignity, which is participating triplicity in a water sign. It's still weak, it's still not strong, but it's like hanging in there, trying to find ways, trying to help themselves financially, trying to find a hope into their custody, into the legal issues that she wants to start. But that moon also conjunct Neptune, and that's what adds even more for her confusion, having Mercury trining the Neptune. That's Mercury is represent her, and having moon is the support that she needs, also conjuncting Neptune. That's adding a lot of confusion, delusion, doesn't have enough information about legality, information about her situation, and how much this gonna affect her and her child. The whole situation is not enough informed for her.
Cameron, I know that you are very much into declination as a concept these days. So talk to me about what declination considerations we might be seeing in relation to the moon and how that impacts her own ability to be financially strong within this situation.
Yeah. So if you look over in the declination table, we see that the moon is contraparallel Uranus. And oftentimes Uranus can bring a sense of like erratic change, but then it also can bring a sense of like a tornado is coming. So it's like kind of hectic around, you know, even like it gives me a sense of like this person trying to put everything together, but it's just like she's going over there and over here because it's like a whirlwind happening around her. When it comes to this circumstance and situation.
Okay. Now, I also know that you're the Pluto person. So look at the declination table again and tell me what other interesting things the Pluto may be doing that directly impacts her and her life at this moment.
Yeah, it was contraparallel the ascendant as well. Yeah, I saw that. So things are like erupting around her that are causing a lot of change, and change isn't always good. So, you know, yeah.
Yeah. And when it comes to Pluto and how Pluto operates within the lives of people, it oftentimes comes with a feeling of not having a choice. I think of all of the Plutonian concepts, this internal realization that Pluto represents forced initiations. And it could be a forced initiation into womanhood, oftentimes. And I love that symbolism and that imagery because it's something inherent within the myth of Pluto Hades, as Pluto being the abductor of Persephone, and Pluto raping Persephone and forcing her to become his wife. It's this concept of not having a choice, or this concept of forces beyond your control completely submerging you and causing you to have to sublimate yourself to those forces, and you essentially having to go along with them in a graceful way, or you having to find a way to find power within that. But it definitely makes us feel as if we cannot do anything to turn the tide of the change that's currently unfolding. And that too was a part of the feeling nature that the querent had within the situation, that it does feel as if my environment is actively working against me, and as if my environment and the powers that be, this was a term that was used, that the powers that be are working against me and not enabling me or not allowing me to be strong within this situation. So I think that that's a significant thing to have noticed as well.
Yeah, I'm curious because I don't really work with the part of fortune fully and completely in my practice yet. So I'm curious what the part of fortune in the moon piece is all about.
Great question, Cameron. So the parts of fortune is one of what have been called the Arabic parts. And I know a lot of people don't like that term, Arabic parts, because apparently they're not actually Arabic, but they're coming to us from the Hellenistic tradition. But the parts of fortune, or the lots of fortune, or the pars fortuna, is a calculated mathematical point within our charts. It's not actually a real thing. In a daytime chart, we find the parts of fortune by taking the ascendant plus the moon minus the sun. So the zodiacal longitude of the ascendant plus the zodiacal longitude of the moon minus the zodiacal longitude of the sun, and you'll come up with the parts of fortune for a daytime chart. But for a nighttime chart, which this is a nighttime chart, you would take the ascendant plus the sun minus the moon, and you would end up with your nighttime part of fortune, which is what we're looking at right now. Because the parts of fortune is bringing together these three very personal points, essentially, you know, I usually feel a way when younger modern astrologers are like, hey, what's your sun, moon, and rising? But they're actually really onto something, because your part of fortune is created from your sun, moon, and rising. So if you could think of anything within your chart really representing the full culmination of these three things, the sun, moon, and rising, indicated by 1 point, that would be a part of fortune. So I've heard a colleague of mine referring to the part of fortune as being the part of hunger. It's a part where our deep soul craving is fed. Now, this is interesting because it goes back to the whole point that the second house in general has to do with not just money, but also with food. And it's interesting that the part of fortune is, yes, at one point, it is a part representing money, but at another level, it's also representing how do we feel nourished? Where within our charts, within our lives, do we feel a sense of renewal and nourishment and generation and regeneration? And that would be indicated through the parts of fortune. So here, the parts of fortune and the moon combination could be one indication that here is a person who is deeply concerned about the state of her financial affairs at this moment and the way in which those finances impact the overarching situation that she finds herself in. But when it comes to judging the part of fortune in the chart, what we do is we go to the dispositor of the part of fortune and we see how that dispositor is doing, because then it's going to tell us something about how the part of fortune is operating. So here we see that the dispositor of the part of fortune is our Jupiter. And we have already said that Jupiter is in a state of fall. It's being received by the Saturn, yes, but in and of itself, Jupiter is in a state of fall. So insofar as the part of fortune is indicating her money, then the part of fortune is only further driving the nail home that the money isn't doing so great. Even though it's the highest thing in the sky, the part of fortune and the moon have the highest elevation, they're sharing that highest elevation there with Neptune, which gives us this sense that money is the primary concern right now. Do I have the financial acumen? Do I have the financial resources necessary to really be powerful in this battle that's being waged, which ultimately lawsuits at the end of the day are battles that require money. You see? War is costly. It's costly on a national level, but it's also costly on a personal level. So the real question here is, do I really have the money necessary in order to stand up and fight against the antagonism that I find coming towards me from my ex-partner? You see? Now, Tracy, you had something significant that you thought about insofar as anticia and contra anticia is concerned. Can you share that with us?
Yeah, that I also noticed that there is an anticia between the ascendant and the second house cusp. So that being, you know, a hidden issue of money being a major concern here.
Good stuff. Now, truthfully, I've never actually ever seen that done in in horary astrology practice ever at all. However, what we do get from this chart is a sense of all roads leading to Rome, is it not? So it does seem to tie into the larger storyline, and so I'm not going to knock it, because it is a monetary concern, and that's another way how you've seen that being a monetary concern. It's happened to me once within my own astrological practice that a planet in an anticial relationship to a house cusp, not one of the angles, but to a house cusp, actually carried the major story that the chart was saying. It happened one time, and it was so rare. I remember that it's only happened one time. So I wouldn't necessarily bring that into the larger foray of our astrological practice that we start looking at anticial relationship to house cusps. But it is interesting. It's a very curious point that, yes, there is an anticial relationship between the ascendant and the second house cusp. And yes, this person was very much asking a question about her ability to financially withhold or stand up for herself within this situation. Now, there was another point that no one has mentioned as yet, and it's that Mercury is in a quincunx relationship to its own dispositor. Now, we did mention earlier when Tracy was talking about the finger of God that there is a yod being formed between the Mercury, the Mars, and the ascendant, but no one has specifically spoken about Mercury being in a quincunx with its dispositor and what that might mean. Now, Cameron, I know that you had something to say about that when we took a break. So tell us what you think it might mean for this Mercury to be in a quincunx with its dispositor.
Yeah, I just know whenever something's quincunx, it doesn't have the same element or modality, and then those are things that like would help something relate to it because it has some type of resonance in a way. And then so one of my yoga teachers, he says whenever someone is in aversion to something, it's like it disgusts them in a way. So it's like it's in a place where it is disgusted by the person's house that it's in, essentially. That's the way that the flavor tastes, that this would taste like.
Definitely.
Yeah, I'm also wondering if because Mercury being in Scorpio and Mars dispositing it, and the dispositor meaning like how things will go, the fact that it's in a quincunx, that being just a negative thing.
Yeah, it is a negative thing. And the one tiny thing I'm going to say is that disposited is not a word. So, what's the
Okay,
word?
what would you say?
Okay, I'm going to chop that up. Disposited is not a word. Astrologers say it all the time. It drives me up a wall. Disposited, nothing is disposited by nothing. It's a disgusting word. All right, so you could say that piece again if you like, and then we'll move on. And then Janae had something to say, but go again, Tracy.
Yeah, I'm also wondering with that Mercury in Scorpio and Mars being disposed of it in a quincunx,
No.
meaning that how it would
No,
go.
hold on.
Is that wrong too?
Mars isn't disposed of by Mercury. Mercury is disposed of by Mars because Mars is the dispose. Okay,
You're right.
Take 3. Action. Go.
I'm also wondering, since Mercury is in Scorpio, and therefore Mercury would be disposed by Mars in a quincunx, and that being how the matter would go would be a negative.
Yeah, definitely. And the thing that Tracy is referring to comes to us from Jean-Baptiste Mohan, who says that whenever something is in a particular state and it's in a hard relationship to its ruler, then it indicates that the outcome will also be in a similar vein of negativity or hardship or trial. Now, he also says something else about the essential dignity of the ruler, but for all intents and purposes, this Mercury is in a quincunx relationship to its ruler. Like Cameron rightfully said vis-a-vis his yoga teacher, it's a relationship of disgust. There's a sense of not seeing eye to eye, neither having the ability to ever see eye to eye. So here we have the Mercury in this quincunx relationship to the Mars, which says that the Mercury doesn't even have the support of Mars behind it. The Mercury doesn't even have the support of its landlord in order to fulfill its promise within this chart. Also, the Mars in Aries is ruling the 11th house. The fulfillment of this person's desires, the fulfillment of this person's hopes and dreams. So the Mercury being in the quincunx relationship with a planet that rules its hopes and dreams is saying that truthfully, you don't really have the sort of power that you need in order to bring these hopes and dreams to pass. They might be the strongest hopes and dreams in the world, but if you are in a quincunx relationship with those hopes and dreams, you do have to make massive adjustments and massive reorganizations within yourself if you're going to come to any sort of successful outcome at all, because as it stands, cosmically speaking, you aren't predisposed to having an outcome of great success. Janae, you were going to say something?
Yeah, you pretty much said it. I was just gonna say, like, the way I view like dispositors or like the planetary ruler is by, like, that's the planet you look to for support. And since there's no relationship there, like, she's not getting any extra support, but you already covered that, so.
Now, earlier, Tracy had mentioned the fact that we would go to the 10th house as representing the judge or as representing the person who presides over this case for the two of them. So, RASHA, talk to me about the judge or the court within this situation, and to whose side does the court seem to be leaning? Or in other words, who is actually in a position where they are being more supported by the court? The querent or the quesited?
The quesited, because it's ruled by Jupiter. So the ruler of the 7th and the ruler of the 10th is both Jupiter. So yeah, the judge would be leaning more into the quesited. having Jupiter again in the 8th house, squeezed by Pluto and Saturn, but yeah, would be more leaning to the positive.
Definitely. And that definitely seems to be what's going on within the case of this story, because that's exactly how the querent felt. She felt as if the judge, the legal system, and as if everything was leaning in the direction of the quasited, the ex-partner. For whatever reasons, it seemed as if the judge was already out on a sort of agenda to make things move in the direction of favoring the person in question. So now, Cameron, talk to us about the declination table and about what things you see in the declination table that further corroborates this story.
Yeah, so in the declination table, we can see the ascendant, which represents the querent, being contraparallel Jupiter, which would represent not only the other or the ex or the open enemy, but also would represent the judge or the system or the court. So both of those things are directly opposing the person and what they're trying to accomplish.
And now taking to consideration the fact that the Saturn, which is representing legal systems in general, being the rule of the 9th house, as well as the Jupiter, which is the specific representation of the judge within this chart, as well as the quasited, as well as the Pluto, which is just Pluto, all are essentially contraparallel to the ascendant. What might that indicate?
That everything is against this person, honestly. You know, it's just all against them. It's not in their favor.
And so said, so done. That is actively how she felt within the situation, that everything was stacked up against her. The financial odds were stacked against her. The legal odds were stacked against her, even though the quasited, the ex-partner, was operating within the situation in a very manipulative way, even though he was acting in a very Plutonian way towards her. She felt as if her, from the perspective of being the mother, was being hard done by the system for no good reason, because her case against the ex-partner was a valid one, as well as she knew that financially the ex was in a far stronger place in order to support himself than she was, and in order to really take this case all the way than she was. So what this chart is doing thus far is showing us the very specific ways in which this question was already unfolding within the life of this querent.
Yeah, along the lines of like the judge being more on the ex's side. Like not only are they ruled by the same planet, but the ruler of the 10th house, which is the judge, is in the ex's 2nd house. And as we established before, the 2nd house could indicate like the person who's like in your corner and is supporting you. So it's just confirmed again that the ex has the support of the judge in the legal system.
I just want to ask you actually about, because when we looked at it, we saw the MC is conjuncting Venus, and Venus in the 5th house. Did you talk about this one?
You mean that the MC is parallel to Venus?
The MC by declination is conjuncting Venus.
Yeah, but so that is true. But I mean, the term is parallel. So you mean the MC parallel?
Parallel. Yes. Yeah. This word is very hard for me to pronounce, by the way.
Okay.
Parallel. Yes. I'm sorry. Okay.
Got it. So what's the question, Rasha?
The MC is conjuncting by declination Venus, and Venus in the 5th house, and that could represent that the child that she's doing the legal, that she's asking about the question.
Definitely. So within this chart, we do see that the Venus is in a parallel relationship to the MC by declination. And the MC, being the highest point of elevation within the chart, can indicate that the most important thing within this entire situation is truly the relationship to the child, or truly the child as being the thing as to why we're even having this argument or these battles to begin with. Now, the other thing that we see there is that the Venus is ruling the 5th house, but it's also ruling the 12th house. And the 12th house is the house of my hidden enemies, as well as the house of my self-undoing. So, a question that we could ask is the relationship that is being formed within these legal proceedings, or is the thought that I'm having in pursuing this legal action for my child essentially something that is working against me? Or have I latched myself onto a very specific concept of what this relationship should look like? And that specific concept that I have regarding myself and regarding my child and regarding the child's father is actually not really the best concept for me to be holding on to right now. I think it's important that we are able to ask these questions, because not every fight should be fought. And especially when it comes to complicated matters like this, where it's a child involved, we really want to ask ourselves, is this an appropriate thing to be doing right now based on the larger unfolding, not just cosmically, but also just based on the interpersonal relationships that are being formed? So the question here is this fight really an appropriate one at all? Not just is the timing appropriate, but is this fight really an appropriate one, or is this fight somehow furthering the wedge of me doing something against myself when there might be an alternate way to go about this? You see?
I also, just to add to that, I also wondered, with that Venus being in Scorpio, in the sign of its detriment, and it being parallel to the MC, if the public exposure would actually damage the child, the public exposure of the case.
It definitely feels as if the overarching situation is something that has everyone quartered and cornered, and it's something that's definitely having everyone uncomfortable. The mother is uncomfortable by being peregrine. The Jupiter isn't really in the best situation at all, but the Jupiter at least has the sort of strength environmentally, monetarily, strength from his own legal team, strength from the courts. The Jupiter seems to have everything in the bag, even though the Jupiter himself doesn't seem to be in the best of situations. And then the child, freshly in Scorpio, freshly in the Via Combusta, is in the middle of the entire thing, lifted on this pedestal of the MC, the thing or the person for whom this war is being fought, but the child also isn't in the best situation in the middle of these entire proceedings. So the question that I asked the mother was essentially, is there another way that you can go about this? Because obviously the financial place where you're coming from isn't the strongest place in the world. So from the perspective of, is this the appropriate time to be taking legal action? Monetarily, it's obvious that you, the querent, aren't in the best position at this moment to be taking any sort of action. From the perspective of you showing up in the courts, we have Neptune being highly elevated, just like that moon, but we have the Neptune squaring the ascendant, or in a square relationship to the ascendant. So Neptune is a planet of illusion and delusion, but it's also a planet of disappointment. So we want to already be aware of the fact that from a legal perspective and from the perspective of the courts, there doesn't seem to be something leaning in your favor in a positive sort of way, because the quote unquote illusion or fantasy that you may have, Mercury trine Neptune, isn't the same as the physical relationship that Neptune does have on you, which is Neptune squaring the ascendant. There is still disappointment at the heart of the situation. So it doesn't seem like it's an appropriate time to take legal action. But because you are so deeply down the rabbit hole of having taken that action already, we want to know how else can you strike a negotiation between your partner and their legal team. Is there some other way how you can step forward into this situation that isn't like the person who's going to burn down the village and fight for what you believe in, but is there a softer way that you could step forward into this situation just from the perspective of your humanity, from the perspective of you as a mother, and let that be the thing that really stands forward to support you and to defend you as you move forward with this? Because the actual ability to fight in this same sort of legal arena as your partner has to fight doesn't seem to be predisposed towards you at this time. So how else can you step forward from a human perspective, from the perspective of a mother, and lay your case forward to your partner, to their legal team, to the court system, to whomever? But can you use that as the thing that you go on, as opposed to this other thing of, I have to get this person back, or I have to win this thing from a very egotistical, machismo sort of space, because that machismo doesn't seem to be readily available to you based on your own resources or based on your own legal support. So that was the advice. Anything you all have to add?
No, I think we reached the same thing. We said she's really deeply hurt. She needs to find ways of finding a ways of communicating with her ex, and get more informed and get the best for her child, because her child just became the one who's she's playing with this card. I think this was, yeah. One. And the other things we looked at the nodes, and we thought maybe this is why they need this kind of communication, both of them. I don't know if you have any idea about the nodes.
Well, the nodes, and what I'm about to say isn't necessarily a traditional concept. It's actually a very modern one, and I think it's attributed to Ivy Jacobson, that when we see something like the ascendant or the moon sharing the same degree as the nodes, it indicates that the situation is fated. Now, I'm not actually sure what that means, but what I have heard from other colleagues of mine is that even if the situation seems as if it's going to turn out in a positive sort of way, it changes in the end, as if there's something really detrimental when the dragon's head or the dragon's tail is the same degree as other significant planets. And in this case, the other significant thing that we're talking about is the ascendant. And while they're not at the same degree, the ascendant is basically 18 degrees Gemini, the North Node is 20 degrees Gemini and some change. So we pretty much are giving them a 2-degree orb and saying, hey, this is really on that cusp of karma, basically, and saying that whatever is going to be happening right now is a quote unquote karmic turning point. And I know that traditional people listening to this may be completely rolling their eyeballs, but I think there is some truth to that this represents a heavy hitting thing within this person's life. not only for the nodes to be rising, but for the ascendant to share such a close degree to the actual nodes that are rising, says that this is really a heavy hitting, turning, pivoting place within this person's life and within this person's relationship to not only the ex, but also to the daughter. And so this is one of the chapters. You know, some things in life feel like just a moment, other things in life feel like an entire chapter. And so with this emphasis on the nodes, we could say that this is a chapter being played out within the life of this person at this moment. Cameron, you were going to say something.
I was going to say, if we were thinking about the lawyer being the 9th house, and that 9th house being ruled by Saturn, and Saturn being the Anareta as well, that was just something that I saw, but it was like kind of like a later thought, but I thought I was curious just to add that in.
It was interesting. What Cameron said is that Saturn is the Anareta, or Saturn is the anaretic planet, which is the quote unquote destroyer. And there's videos that we've done about that concept, so please do go and check those out. But it's interesting that you bring that up, because for her, finding a lawyer to support her based on her financial situation was a major point of difficulty. And so she was having to find alternate ways to be supported legally or to have legal assistance, because the standard ways of going in and paying for a lawyer just wasn't accessible to her. The cost of it wasn't accessible to her. And so she ended up having to go and find, you know, one of the lawyers who does pro bono civil work, basically. And I know that that's something that she was working on. But this whole concept of finding and being able to plug into supportive legal help was really a difficult thing for her at this time. So I think the Mercury in the quincunx relationship to the Mars has a lot of information, because you have a dream and the goal and the vision that you have in your mind, and it's a great dream and a great goal and a great vision. It's Mars and Aries, but at the same time, you are quincunx that dream, i.e., you don't really have the stuff to manifest that dream or bring that dream into reality right now. So what are the changes that you need to make in light of your awareness of the quote unquote impossibility or improbability of you manifesting the specific dream that you have? What is the other thing that you can do to make this possible? Because right now, how you're approaching the situation doesn't seem to be the very best. Now, in conclusion, that Mars is making a sextile relationship to the ascendant, which is a positive aspect. And a sextile could be considered to be a small win, whereas a trine could be considered to be a big win. So there does seem to be some smaller success that she has in relation to manifesting this dream or this goal or this vision that she has, but it's caught up in a hell of a lot of work. Mars is still ruling the 6th house, and it's probably not going to be the grand vision of success that she would have hoped for. So our advice to her is, after having made the necessary adjustments that you need to make, be aware that they predispose you to having tinier successes, but probably successes that are more sustainable, that don't feel like it's the end of the world for you, your daughter, and the other person concerned. And that's about it for this. All right, everyone. So that was quite an interesting horary, and it was interesting for me really because of the way in which it shows us that sometimes you could want to dream, you could have a vision, but if there are things within the environment that say, hey, you need to look at doing this in another way, then those things should be the things that you pay attention to, because oftentimes our dreams that we have aren't really aligned with our own highest good. And it doesn't mean that we should drop the thing entirely, but sometimes it does indicate that we need to rearrange and readjust our relationship to how we think reality should be. So that was my greatest takeaway. What about you guys?
Yeah, I mean, just what was really interesting is just all the different ways the chart showed the same thing as usual. And it's just a really unfortunate situation because your heart feels for a person when you hear what they're going through and, you know, feeling like as a mother, and I'm a mom, that they're wanting to do what's best for their child, but that doesn't mean they're going to win. And so you have to be able to see everything in the chart and what the resources are for the other person and still give them the advice that you don't necessarily want to give them, but you do have to give it to them.
Janae?
Yeah, kind of echoing what Tracy said, like if I were in front of the client working one-on-one with them, it would be like very difficult because obviously they want to hear a certain answer, but the chart is saying no and multiple turns. And so I just imagine like being there with them and how difficult that conversation would be, just having to say no because of this, and it keeps going. Like, yeah, that's really hard.
Well, for me, it was not the opposite of what they're saying, but like I come from a background of like being like very counselor oriented. So like having like it felt like horary like landed stronger for me because like I had just like practical things to tell them why in a real physical tangible way why it's not working out for them. Because I can do the counseling piece of that, and then like, you know, the way to say it to somebody and to be in that space, like I really have built my craft around that. So having like the tangible, like this is why it's not working out, it felt good because it was like infusing with what I already do easily. So that's what I took away from it.
Yeah, I would say, you know, echo everything you guys said. I would say as well as really look inside, look what this legal issue is going to do to you. Look how the blind spot that you're not seeing. I know it's hard to see it, but there's a blind spot that you are completely not seeing, how the outcome of any legal issues now is gonna affect you and it's gonna affect your child. And find ways to communicate with your ex and make your life better in a way without even maybe the legality, because it doesn't look good. Yeah.
Well, I am definitely gifted to be surrounded by such gifted people. And I'm also happy that we were all able to come into a place where we realized that while the chart does say something very specifically, there's another part of us that's non-astrological that has to know how to bridge that gap for someone. And I think that that's where our humanity comes in, that we know how to speak truthfully, but we also know how to speak in a humane way. Because it's not, and I've said this so many times before, that no one cares how right you can be if you don't know how to be helpful. So I think that the astrology, it gives us very specific tools and techniques to be right. And it's our duty as astrologers to practice those tools and techniques to make sure that we're sharp and to make sure that we're possibly even consistently right. But then after you have quote unquote mastered the ability to be right at something, I think the next thing that we all have to ask ourselves is, okay, now how can I help this person to heal? How can I help this person to really find the correct path or the correct action based on what this moment requires? And that is something that you're not going to learn in the textbook. And that's something that you maybe have to do other studies in order to gain. But that is the counseling portion of astrology that I think really fits well within our craft, because it's not just about the astrologizing, it's also about the troubleshooting and the problem solving. And if we can do those two things together, then we stand to really be forces of healing and change within the lives of others. So today's date is December 13th, 2020, and this is the last of our Horary Astrology Hotlines for the year of 2020. And I think it's a bit ironic how this final horary does carry some of the essence of this year 2020 with it, because 2020 has definitely been a year of us rearranging our relationships to our own goals and our relationships to our own very specific things that we all thought our year would have looked like. So it's interesting to be in this space of reflection with the chart that we just read, as well as with this year that we've all just been through. But hope springs eternal, because if it's one thing that 2020 has given us the ability to do, it's given us the ability to readjust our relationship to our goals, readjust our relationship to the skills that we think we have, and it's also given us all the ability to grow in ways like we never thought we could. So, on behalf of our family here at Oraculos and the entire Oraculos Horary Astrology Hotline, we want to wish you all season's greetings, a very happy winter, a happy Christmas and Hanukkah, and all of the wonderful things. Happy Kwanzaa, happy end of 2020. And we're wishing you and yours, your family, your loved ones, all the best, all of our love, until we meet again in 2021. I'm your host, Mychal A. Bryan, and this is my wonderful panel of colleagues, of friends, and astrologers, TRACEY, JANAY, RASHA, and Cameron. From the bottom of my heart, I love all of you. Thank you for being here, and see you soon. Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Happy holidays, everyone.
Woo!
And now you don't have to have lunch because you ate a fly. This was eventful.
Thank you so much, Mychal.
You're very, very, very welcome. This was the end.
Yeah, you're putting a lot of energy into this, and I really appreciate it. I mean, yeah.
Oh, so much.
Yeah.
This means the world to me, and I love doing the show. I love being with you guys, and so I wish all of you the best for the holidays, and we'll keep getting together.
Definitely. And maybe I can drop in. Cameron, you're still muted, but maybe I can drop in one of these days.